Nice. So let's get underway and we'll have a look to start with. This is not there because I stopped using it momentarily. Here she is. Better watch what I was about to say. I was about to say it's so reassuring to me when Zoe can't work out how to get to the next screen. And here I am fumbling from one screen to another, just as Zoe turns up. There you go. Welcome. You can be our off-campus representative this evening.
Is it the only one so far?
So far. So we have apologies from Juliet and Heidi and Felicity. And so we're hoping we might still maybe get Kirsty and Harry, and maybe Nat. But that's it. It's a very, very low. Hello, little one in the background. Sometimes blue, sometimes not.
This is the other child.
Really? How come he's got the same face?
No, he's got his father's face. Speaking of this child, this is a very appropriate one for this evening for prepositions. See if you can work out what mita ya means.
Okay.
All right, off you go, please.
All right, so let's get this bit underway. I've got to find the starting point. Okay, so we'll work through. We're basically we're doing some learning, but we're also making a video for the other people to watch in their own time later on. So hello to all the people who'll be playing at home at a later stage. So as we gather here, we acknowledge the Turrbal and Jagera peoples, the first peoples of this land on which we work, live, and walk here at the college. We acknowledge them and their ancestors for their survival, their continued traditions, and their spiritual connections to and caring of country. And we pay respect to their elders past and present, and pray for them during this time of, I guess, heightened conflict and heightened tension in the final weeks in the lead up to the referendum. And we continue to support their right to self-determination, committed to reconciliation, and we respectfully acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. And here comes Nat. Hello, Nat. And the Curlews have also turned up just to make it interesting. I'm going to shrink my lockdown window so I can actually see my whole screen without being locked out. So let's just remind ourselves of the wording of the Shema, and we will then read the whole thing together in just a moment. I think the bits that we probably usually need to kind of think about before we get there is Va'ahabta, this one here. And I was sure I'd chosen a red color, but there you go, it's dropped out. So this word here, wa or Va'ahabta, and the ahab bit in the middle, that's the word for love. And then we've got Levavka. Okay, this that's interesting. Bukol, and they've got Lebobka. They're treating that as a short comments. Is that right? That seems a bit strange. I'm sure it's Levavka, which is your heart. This is and all, or with all, your heart of you. And this is the nefesh, the soul of you. And then, and all the strength, the power of you. Okay, so the ka in each case, and also up here, hello, ka, and that was the only one. That's the second person singular pronoun, and here, of course, we have na, which is the first person plural, power. Okay, so these are the bits that are still a bit more challenging for us. Let's turn off all the ink, as they say. And let's take our way through it. Let's just try saying it together fairly slowly. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Wa ahabta et Adonai Eloheka, b'kol levavka, u'b'kol nafshka, u'b'kol moedka. Okay. And ancient words. And as is often the case with ancient oral traditions, they've been shaped so that there's some repetition, and particularly threefold repetition.
Greg, can you go through the nefesh with the two Shabazz pronunciation?
Okay, sure. So you've got nefesh,
Yep.
which if it was just a regular standalone noun, I think it's a segulate noun. Feel free to jump in, Zoe. So it's just nefesh, but because of the ending, the pronominal suffix, it's got longer, and you compensate for that by shortening at the other end. So it becomes naf, okay, nafshika, which is what we've got here, nafshika. Okay. I'm just surprised that this is being transliterated as an O, because it's not a cut of kametz. Okay. All right. And looking at the Lord's Prayer, let's try and work our way through the whole thing. The bits that are new are the last couple of lines, and it's lovely how the curlers want to join in. So the last 3 lines there are, or 4 lines really, and forgive us, Hamin, the trespasses or the failings of us, okay, just as also, Kai now being used as like also, we, Hamais, have forgiven, past tense, the offences or the sins of the ones offending us, okay, basically those sinning against us. And this may here, most of the time we'll use u, like up here, to say no or not, okay. But when it's not an imperative mood, then the negative particle becomes may, which is counterintuitive for us because it's the opposite of the way we use that sound. Okay.
It's not.
Sorry.
U is not.
Oh, that's right. That's Uranos. Yeah. So there's probably not an U or an ook, just that when we come down to may. Okay, yeah, sorry. Yep, I was looking at the hyphenated words, and okay, so this is the way we say no or not when we're not in the indicative mood. So subjunctive and other imperatives and so on. And do not lead us, and here's the us. Do not lead us.
Actually, really cool how you did that.
into pyrasmon, into a time of testing. Okay. But Allah, and this is keep safe us, apo, from, and then to poneru, keep us safe from evil, or keep us from the evil one. And there's ambiguity, as you can translate it either way.
Just notice on that row that starts Rusai, it's got a rough breathing.
Sorry.
That's a
yeah.
That's quite normal for a row. When it starts a word, it'll have a rough breathing. So you transliterate that as an RH, as in rheumatism or diarrhea or some other such thing. But rheumatism's probably a good.
Been the one to use.
Yeah.
Yeah. So remembering that we're reading Matthew's version of the Lord's Prayer, in Luke there's a shorter and presumably earlier version of the Lord's Prayer, And there's another version also in the Didache, which is closer to Matthew's, not quite the same. And so one of the interesting biblical questions in the background is what's going on here with Matthew and Luke having quite different versions. It's obviously the same prayer, and yet the versions are so different. And Matthew's is much more, if you like, liturgical and spiritualized, whereas Luke, for example, has, forgive us our debts as we forgive those who are indebted to us. Matthew has turned it into sins or offenses. So it's a slightly more spiritualized thing. But anyway, let's work our way through it, which is the version in Matthew is more or less the version that we use in the prayer book. So, pater haimon, ho en tois urinois, hagias theto, to onoma su, el theto, he basileia su, gene theto, to thelema su, hos en urino, kai epi geis. Ton aton, sorry, I missed my bounce there. Ton aton haimon, ton epiousion, dos haimin semeron. Kai aphes haimin, ta ophelemata haimon. Hos kai haimais, aphekaman, tois ophelaites haimon. Kai me aisenenkes haimas, ais pyrasmon, ala rusai humas apo tu oneru. And I said humas instead of hamas, but I'm sure I'm not the first person to get those words back to front. So it's a beautiful prayer, and I hope we'll become more and more comfortable with it in the Greek version. In our cultural knowledge this week, I want us to be thinking a little bit about coins and weights, and obviously keeping it under control so it doesn't become too big. Topic, which is very tempting for me, as you may or may not know, but you will probably pick up in a minute. So let's just get our head around what's going on. So when coins are ancient coins are being discovered, they'll often look like the one up there in the left-hand corner. They'll be dirty. If they're bronze, they'll be corroded to some extent. If they're silver or gold coins, of course, they don't corrode. Hence that saying, silver and gold, will not rust. That sort of idea we get in the scriptures. So, but if they're bronze or copper coins, they do corrode. On the other hand, silver and gold coins can wear and become quite hard to read. So when they're cleaned up, this is not the same set of coins, but coins coming out of the ground will look pretty insignificant. Once they're cleaned up, they can look rather more interesting. So what's going on with coins? If we think about picking up that line from the Gospels, whose head is on the coin? Remembering that lots of the coins didn't have anybody's head on them. So coins are to be used in what is today central Turkey, Anatolia, around about the year 600. And the first pieces of metal used as coins were naturally occurring bits of electrum that were just in the river, alluvial metal. And people got the idea of using those to buy and pay for things. So, and then they began to shape them and to stamp them with various symbols to say, this is not just a stone out of the creek, this really is a coin. Okay, so they begin around 600 BCE, because it takes 150, 200 years, even longer, before the first coins are going to turn up in Palestine. Because the technology has to be adopted, the custom has to spread. And so the first, if you like, Judean coins or Jewish coins are not going to be until the late Persian period in Palestine. And they're really copying from the Philistine cities like Ashdod and so on. So until that point, when there were references to coins, there were no such things, but there were weights, metal weights. And just as the English word pound is because once upon a time it was a weight. Same with shekel. Once upon a time, shekel was a weight. So these terms which were used for lumps of metal, bars of metal, whether that's a rectangular kind of cube or whatever, these eventually became as well the terms that were often used for the coins. So the origins of the coinage terms goes back to the use of metal for bartering before they had become coins. And even when they're coins, particularly for the cheaper coins, you didn't count the individual coins, you weighed them. Because they're handmade coins, it still mattered how much metal is in there, not what the government said it was worth. So you would weigh a bag of coins rather than count them in order to work out how much was being paid. Minting was restricted to people, to those places which were self-governing, so autonomous cities like Tyre and Sidon, which were always powerful, independent cities, occasionally were conquered by other people, or a major power. And of course, the first major power to pick up coins was really the Persian Empire. But before that, a number of the kingdoms in what is now Turkey had begun to issue coins, and we'll see one of them in a moment. So I said the earliest Jewish coins come from Yehud, and they date from the Persian period. And by the time we get down to the Maccabean and Hasmonean periods, around about 150 through to about 50 BCE, the coins are ways for the Hasmonean rulers to assert their independence. Like, we're going to mint our own money. We're not going to use Seleucid money, Seleucid coin. So to mint your coin was not only an exercise in power, it was also an act of resistance. And so when you get to the Jewish rebels, the Jewish war, 66 to 73, and again in the Bar Kokhba period, one of the first things the rebels did was issue their own coins. We're not going to use the king's money. We're going to have Jewish money. Okay. And on those Hasmonean, Maccabean, but particularly Hasmonean coins, they used Paleo-Hebrew script. So not the Hebrew we can read, because that's actually Aramaic alphabet. Sorry, folks, week 8. You've been learning the Aramaic alphabet. So on the Hasmonean coins, instead of using Greek and instead of using Aramean, as the Persians would have done, they used Paleo-Hebrew to say the name of the king or the prince, that he's also the high priest and so on. But the point is, on their coins, they were putting Hebrew. Okay, so they weren't using Greek and they weren't using Aramaic. They were using the coins as a way of asserting cultural independence and autonomy.
So does that make coinage an important source for Paleo-Hebrew?
Yes, yeah. Because there aren't too many other places where you're going to find it. There are a few potsherds and things like that. And a few, yeah, but basically the best examples are going to be on coins. And unfortunately, the Hasmonean coins are all bronze, so they are not as well preserved as they would be had they minted them on silver. But they weren't wealthy enough to mint, and they weren't cheeky enough to mint silver coins. No doubt they would have liked to. So they're promoting the use of Hebrew and Hebrew identity as part of their civil war or their independence. Jewish coins were mostly aniconic, so they didn't have pictures of people or of animals. So no graven image idea from the Ten Commandments. Okay, they had other things on them though, stars and anchors and helmets and various things, but not faces of people and not birds and donkeys or elephants or whatever. That's also true mostly for the Islamic coins much later on. They tend to be aniconic, not to have pictures on them. There are a couple of exceptions, one of them being Philip Herod's son, Philip the Tetrarch, who put his own face on the front of his very first issue of coins, and he put the emperor on the back, and he never did it again. So that was, I think he got a memo from Rome saying, if you're going to have a head on your coin, it's the emperor that goes on the front. So even coins issued by Pontius Pilate didn't have the emperor's head on the front of the coin, but they had all sorts of symbols of the emperor as a Roman high priest, Pontifex Maximus. So various sacred objects that the emperor would use in the pagan worship were put on the front of the coins, but not the emperor's head. So there's a little kind of standoff going on. We won't put the emperor's head on the coin, but we will remind you that the emperor is the chief priest of the Roman religion. And you will put those on the coin. So interesting. So here's just some quick examples, trying not to get too sidetracked here. So these are examples that I've quickly picked up from my database of the Centre for Coins, Culture and Religious History, which is my retirement gig at St. John's Cathedral. There's the website. So I've got 6 or so coins. The first is an example, of one of the very earliest examples of a coin. It's issued by the city of Sardis in the kingdom of Lydia. So it's in what we would now call Turkey. And it's issued about 600 BCE. And on the back, on the reverse, it's just got some square punch marks. But on the front, they're already starting to create art. And these are people that don't have spectacles or magnifying glasses. I mean, they're pretty amazing what they could do with their.
How big is the coin?
This one I haven't actually held it in my hand, but I'm guessing it's about as big as my thumbnail. Yeah, I'd have to actually look up the database to see how big it is. But
Is that
pretty cool, eh?
that's meant to be a lion's head, and the lion's head, and there's also a sun, and the lion's head was also a symbol of Alexander the Great, but he's not here yet. This is 250 years before Alexander, so it's a symbol of one of the Greek gods, Apollo, whatever. And when Alexander becomes identified with Apollo, he starts to wear the lion headdress, which merges into his head. And then all the Greek kings afterwards, Ptolemaic and Seleucid, they represent themselves as looking like Alexander, who looks like Apollo. In other words, look at me, I'm God. Jumping down to the time of Yehud, this is one of the very early coins from the province of Yehud. Notice that this is around about 200 years later, they do have a face, the head of a king. This is meant to represent the Persian emperor, presumably, Persian ruler, king of kings. And on the other side, interestingly, it has an owl. And the owl is the symbol of Athena.
Wisdom, is it? Is it wisdom or war?
Yes, but it's the symbol of Athens.
Yeah.
So the coins being produced in Philistia, which are being copied for Judea, for Yehud, are actually basing themselves on coin designs from Athens because they want their coins to look real.
Oh, okay.
When was the Persian War? I think the Persian War between Athens and
Thermopylae and all that stuff, 484.
about that.
Yeah, it's 100 years later, but 80 years later.
Yeah, so
I can't see the face on the front.
The owl.
No, I can see the owl.
Oh.
Up the top, in the top left quarter, there's a profile side on. Ear,
Oh, yeah, look.
eyebrow, nose.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here, this area here.
Yep.
Oh,
I'm
yes,
looking
you
at
can-
that area.
yes.
It just looks like a mass, doesn't it?
Just trust me.
Oh, is it facing downwards?
No,
No.
I think that's his nose.
yeah,
That's his ear. That's the neck, the back of the neck. That's the jaw.
Oh.
And that's
okay.
probably the horn,
Oh,
like
all
a
right.
ram's horn or something. Just trust me if I say there's a
No.
head up there.
I've got to see it
Yeesh.
for myself.
Look what I've got to deal with all the time. So coming forward another bit, this is when Yehud is now under Egyptian rule. So 250 BCE. And so it's Greek rule, but it's ruled by the Greek kings of Egypt called the Ptolemies. And it's Ptolemy 1, Ptolemy 2, Ptolemy 3, Ptolemy 4. You know, they all got called Ptolemy, basically. There's one or two exceptions. And again, you've got the king's face here, looking to the right. There's his nose, there's the chin, and he's wearing some kind of wreath, a laurel wreath. And over on the back, you've got the distinctive eagle.
What's an eagle?
Chest of an eagle with its wings.
What was a camel?
Okay. Yes, I heard you say camel. So that's one wing. And see the feathers? There's the chest of the bird, and here's the stub of the other wing.
Okay.
Yeah, I can see it now.
And once you've seen a few of these coins, you go, oh yeah, you can pick it from 100 yards away. You can put your glasses on, all sorts of things help. Yeah. The next one is going to be a coin of Alexander Jannaeus. Now he was the Hasmonean ruler from 104 BC to about 76, so almost 30, well, around about 30 years. He issued so many. He was the big coin maker for the Jewish world, and they were still using his coins 100 years later, because we found them in the bottom of Mary's well in Nazareth in 1999, and it's a first century well. So even more than 100 years after he's dead, they're still using coins issued by Alexander Jannaeus. Notice his first name, Alexander. He's a Jewish king, but he wants to be called Alexander. Conqueror. Okay. So on the front, there's an 8-pointed star.
See that?
See that? Very good.
thought it
You
was a
agree?
wheel.
There's an 8-pointed star there. Very good. And on the back, there's an anchor. Yeah, on the reverse, there's an anchor surrounded by a circle of dots and some wreaths. Okay. Classic Hasmonean and Herodian coin. I should have brought some in, but I didn't, because I knew we'd get distracted. We've already spent too much time. These are tiny little, they're again smaller than my thumbnail. They're just made of bronze. They're issued by the Hasmoneans and by the Herodians and by Pontius Pilate. This is what we used to call the widow's mite. Okay, the story of the widow putting her 2 copper coins, bronze coins. And in Old English money, you had a penny, you had a halfpenny, you had a farthing, and you had a mite, which was the smallest copper coin at the time of the King James translation. So anachronistically, we call these coins the mite, but actually they're pruta in Hebrew. Okay, the next one, this is the same currency. It's just, they're not, I couldn't get them all to scale. So this is a pruta issued by Herod, who likes to be called the Great, okay, in 37 BCE, his very first year of being top dog in Palestine. This is his inaugural coin, okay, and this is on display in the coin exhibition at St. John's Cathedral. There's a permanent exhibition, about 110 coins from this set. So this is coin number 15. There's the helmet again, okay, that I talked about before, surrounded by a laurel wreath, little star at the top. And on the front, there's a kind of tripod. And on either side, there are some, that tells us the year, that gives us the date. And then we've got Herodes Basilios. So what's going on here? In terms of language, what's going on?
Like 2 different, isn't it? Hebrew and Greek?
No, it's entirely Greek. So Herod changes the legends on the coins to Greek. Okay, he's not trying to do we're totally different, you can't tell us what to do. He's a wholly owned subsidiary of the Roman Empire. So in Herod's coins and the coins of Antipas and Philip, the legends are in Greek, not in Paleo-Hebrew. So the language tells us who's the top dog around here. So the coins in the Persian period would have either been, if they had legends, which is the inscription, would have been Aramaic, Persian, or Greek, in the case of the Greek cities. In the Hasmonean period, it becomes Paleo-Hebrew. And it'll say things like Yohanan, high priest, prince and the council of the Jews in 4 lines on the front of the coin. Okay. So Herod is, you know, so it's basically the same coin. It's just the image looks a bit bigger in real life. The last coin, again, exactly the same kind of coin. It's a coin. It's a prutar, a bronze coin, issued by Pontius Pilate. On the front, it's got the high priest's ladle that he would use to scoop out some of the sacrificial wine or whatever and put it on the sacrifice. In other words, that's a pagan religious object on the front of the coin. On the back, it's got a wreath and it's got the date. Okay. And this is the year 30. In our language, it's the year 30. So this coin was issued the same year that Pilate ordered the death of Jesus.
Just, if I can, Greg, just looking at the Greek on this coin here, you can make out here, Herodu,
Yep.
which is genitive, isn't it? Of Herodos. Herodu.
The answer is yes. The answer is
Yeah,
yes.
I'm
Yes.
nodding, I'm nodding.
And Basileus is the genitive of Basilus, which is king. So of Herod, king, the king. And Greg, you said this is the year.
Yeah. So the L, yeah, the L is for year, and then there's another symbol there that tells us which year.
Year of Herod, the king.
That's the first year of Herod the king. Yep. Year 1. Yep. Whereas this one at the other side is something like year 16. I remember offhand. So that's just a quick snapshot. I could spend the rest of the night talking about the coins, but I will refrain. I'll just put up one last coin. This is our favorite coin at the center. And it's a beautiful example of the kind of thing Jesus is talking about. Whose head is on the coin? Well, this is the head of Tiberius. And again, you look at the Greek, Tiberios, Sebastios, Caesarius. Tiberius,
Augustus.
the worshipped one, Sebastios. Yeah, well, it's depending which one you're looking at, and then emperor, ruler, Kaiser, Caesar. Okay, so in both cases, you've got him being described as, and on the reverse, it's God. So you've got Caesar, Theos is God, and then you've got Sebastios, but it's badly corroded. You can see the Sebastios a bit easier on the front of the coin, but it has Tiberius and it has Caesar.
Cool.
Okay, so on the front it's Tiberius, on the back it's Julius Caesar, his adopted daddy. And because Caesar had been deified by the Senate, sorry, Octavian had been, on the back it's Octavian, and yeah, but we've got Sebastius for both of them. It just means worship one.
Yes, it's also the name of.
Yes, but it's not the name of, in this case, it's not the name of Augustus because it's used in both places. It just means the one to be worshipped, which is what August, of course, means. So on the back, it's Augustus, Octavian. He's dead but turned into a god. And you can tell that if you're a first century person because of his headgear. He's got a sparkling diadem. He's been promoted. He's no longer a human. He's now a god. Because he's a god, Tiberius is the son of God.
Just like that.
So that's what son of God meant in the first century. Okay.
That's really cool, isn't it?
So
I'd love to see one of those.
So you've actually got, so on the obverse, you've got the laureate head. That means with a wreath around it, laurel wreath, looking to the right. Tiberius, Sebastios, Kaiser. On the reverse, you've got the radiating crown of Augustus, looking to the right. Theos, Sebastios, Kaiser. It's from the mint in Antioch. The date is uncertain, possibly 28 CE, 2 years before the crucifixion. And there's only about a dozen examples of this coin known to exist. And we have one of them in the collection at the cathedral. And this is the kind of coin, not necessarily exactly this particular issue, but a coin that had Tiberius head and which clearly says, I'm the emperor and I'm God and you better worship me. So that's hence Jesus saying, so do we pay taxes to Caesar or not? Give me a coin. Whose head's on the coin? Well, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar. Okay, so it was not a Herodian coin. It was not a coin issued by Pontius Pilate. It had to be a coin issued from a major city outside Palestine where they would issue a coin with the emperor's head on the coin. Okay. Wow. Let's stop there before I get too excited. Okay. But there's some fascinating stuff to be learned from the coins. And the coins, remember, are not just instruments of commercial activity. They're also, they're small pieces of propaganda. Because as people are paying for stuff, they're seeing the little messages that the government has put on the coins.
So cool. And you can go and see those at St. John's.
Yeah, they're there on display all the
Green
time.
there, so-
We've got about 3,000 coins, but we've got 110 that are on display permanently in the cathedral. All right, change of gear. We're going to talk about prepositions and pronominal suffixes. Prepositions relate both to Hebrew and Greek, but the pronominal suffixes are more to do with Hebrew. Okay, we'll get a bit of a balance as we go through. And this sort of wraps up our work with the nominal system. We've done nouns, we've done adjectives, we've done articles, we've worked our way through the different forms of the noun system. So tonight, in terms of this list, which we probably won't see after tonight, we're actually, that should have been over preposition. Okay, so it's over preposition is the main thing we're looking at. So in English, preposition is a word, often quite short, but not always, which indicates a relationship between the object of the preposition, what's called the direct object of the preposition, and some other noun that's in the phrase, in the sentence. So they're words like above, after, among, between, by, inside, of, on, since, etc., etc., etc. These are prepositions, and depending, they'll either refer to time or to location or to some other aspect of relationship between the subject of the sentence and the action that's being described, and then this indirect object, but which the direct object of the preposition, the indirect object of the sentence. Now, there's a long list of Hebrew prepositions, or indeed of just of prepositions in Hebrew for the rest of us. We're not even going to try to learn them all, but it's what we're talking about is like the word under in this phrase. The book is under the table. Under is the preposition and the table is the direct object of the preposition. So we're saying where the book is. Okay. It's not the direct object of the verb, but but the relationship between the preposition and what follows is the object of the preposition. Preposition is under, and the prepositional phrase is under the table. And those words belong together. They're a little sub-clause, sub-phrase that belong together. We could, for example, have said the book is large, then it's just an adjective. But when you say the book is under the table, on the chair, outside, then we're actually constructing a prepositional phrase. The object of the preposition, like the table, is always accusative, or in English, objective case. And so it's always give it to me, give the book to me, not give the book to I, not give the book to my. It's give the book to me, give the book to him, give the book to her, give the book to them, give the book to us. Okay, so after the preposition, it has to be accusative. And the main place we still see that in English is, in fact, the personal pronoun. That's the one bit of English which is still almost completely inflected for case. I, me, my, and so on. Okay? So Peter gave the book to her. Not Peter gave the book to she. Okay. So in Hebrew, there are two types of prepositions. Ones which are inseparable and ones which are separable. Aren't you glad to know that? Okay. Inseparable means they're always bolted on. They're attached to the word. So where we had to the book in Hebrew, the to element, which will be lamed in a moment, will actually be prefixed onto the front of the word. So it joins on. It can't stand by itself. Whereas to in English stands by itself. Okay, that's a separable preposition. Hebrew does have separable ones, but the most common ones are these: b, k, and l. And b tends to mean in, with, or by, in the house, with a stick, whatever. Okay, so in this case, it's b melech, with a king. Probably that you wouldn't translate that as in a king, unless you're describing the situation of a meal. Okay, k tends to mean like, as, or even according to, and you just put the k on the front, k-melech. Now, before Zoe jumps in and reminds us, if there's already a definite article in front of the king, the ha-melech, then you take out the ha, the het, and you just put the preposition consonant in there, but you leave the sound. Okay, so la-melech is to the king. Okay, whereas le-melech is to a king. But if there was ha-melech and you want to put the b or the l in front, you take out the het, you leave the rest of the article there, but you substitute the het with the bet or the kaf or the lamed. Okay, now we've actually found ancient, well, we've found the jars, we found the neck of ancient pottery jars, earthenware jars, which would have been about so high. In fact, the ones at Bethsaida are actually about literally so high, about so round, and you can actually put a 10-year-old child in because we've done it. We didn't cook them, we just wanted to see would he fit, okay? Once we'd put the jug back together. Now, when these were being used to collect tax from farmers, a certain percentage of their crop, whether it's olive oil or grain, whatever, would go into this container, and on the neck it'll have in Hebrew le melech, for the king. So that's one of the places we do find Proto-Hebrew or Paleo-Hebrew being used. Yeah. But it won't look like our Hebrew because they're not using the square Aramaic script.
And if those prepositions replacing a definite article in front of a guttural, they'll take over the longer.
Oh, I'm sure the answer is yes. I mean, I'm sure it is. I haven't stopped to think that.
Basically, the rule of thumb is that you take the consonant of the preposition and then the vowel of the definite article.
Yeah.
So get rid of the ha, like Greg said, and you take, but you need to keep the preposition because otherwise you don't know what it is. So the logic would indicate that if it's in front of a guttural and it's got a kametz instead of a patak, that you'd keep the same.
So if you're saying in the land and land was ha'aretz, then you'd just become ba'aretz.
Yeah.
So you just switch the consonant for the preposition, swaps out with the consonant for the article.
Yeah. So eretz becomes ha'aretz for that land, and then ba'aretz for in the land.
It's actually really simple. It's delightfully simple. Not like Greek at all.
The inseparable prepositions are simple.
Yes. Thank you, Zoe. Now you put fear into their hearts. Then I'm only going to look at 4 or 5 examples, and I'll show you why in a moment. But these are examples of the standalone preposition. In other words, the separable. They're a word on their own. Okay. So lipne or lifnei. I didn't pay any attention to pronunciation in Bagad Kafat as a young boy. So lifnei actually means to the face of, but it's used in English when it's translated, it becomes before or in the presence of, but it actually literally is to the face of, like in your face, meaning I'm here, I'm in your presence, oh God. Okay. Al, okay, is on or upon. L is to. Hang on to those two thoughts. Min, or even just mit, has a inseparable. So min is from, and many of these, by the way, are more or less the same in Arabic. It's the languages are so close. Okay, and min, for example, is the word for from in Hebrew as well as Arabic. But sometimes the n disappears and it just becomes mit with a sort of dagesh in the next letter, a little bit like the article. But again, it doesn't have the het; it's just the mem by itself. Okay, so these are the most regular ones. I'm going to show you some more, but these are the pick of the picks. You're going to run into these all the time. And so lifnei melech, in the presence of a king. Al melech, on a king. Well, not likely, but anyway. And so el melech, to a king. Okay, whereas when it was le melech, it meant for the king, as in this is the taxes I'm paying. Okay, so le and el are sort of awfully similar, but this is more about motion towards, whereas le is about to in the sense of belonging to, for the sake of. Okay, very similar though. Min and mit both mean from. And so a word like Emmanuel is with us, God. Emmanuel. So the N is us and the L is God. Different kind of L in this case. Sorry about that. Probably not a good example, but Emmanuel, that famous word from Christmas time, means with us, God. So God with us. Okay, now, this is why we're not going into a huge amount of detail. I just did a search, as you would expect me to do now that I've learned how to do this. And I just did a search for particles which are tagged, grammatically tagged as being preposition. 18,153 of them are lamed with a shava or some variation of the shava. I mean, the pointing's not actually that important. So le is the most common preposition, meaning to or for, belonging to, appertaining to. Be is the second most common, 11,600 odd. Et, the direct object marker, is almost 11,000 times. Min is 7,500. Al, meaning on, 5,700. L, meaning towards or to, 5,500. And you can see there's going to be a whole lot of others, but they're not worth bothering to try and learn. When you've learned what a preposition does, accordance will say, this is a preposition. You will quickly get to recognize le and be and que and et and so on. Al and el, the rest are only going to show up once in a blue moon. Okay. So, for example, if you were about to get on a flight to or from Israel and you were traveling on the Israeli airline, which I try to avoid but can't always manage, what I do like about El Al is the way they've played with the language. It's a very clever name for an airline. El Al. To and on. Okay, those two prepositions we're just looking at, el and al. To, and again, notice how they've stylized the aleph and the lamed, just as we stylize letters in English for graphic reasons. So el, al, and then they put the English in between. And so the English and the Hebrew are sort of hooked in together. And there's one other preposition there. Look at this one. Le Israel. So the airlines of Israel, belonging to, pertaining to Israel. So in English, we'd say Israeli, the Israeli airline. Okay, they do it by saying Le Israel.
Yeah.
So there's just some modern examples of how the prepositions are being used playfully on the badging of the Israeli airline. Comment or question? No, I thought I heard a
Yeah, of course I do.
murmur. So we'll just pause because we're more or less finished looking at prepositions in Hebrew, unless Zoe thinks there's something we really got to mention that I haven't.
No, it might just be worth mentioning, Greg, if you don't mind going back 2 slides to the separate pronouns, the separable ones. Maybe one more.
Yep.
That one of the nuances of translation is that it's not, these prepositions will change depending on their context. And there is an element to which they will differ if it's a temporal relationship or if it's a spatial relationship. So, for example, lifnei temporally means before, spatially means in front of.
Yeah.
So, and similarly,
I guess in a way, the same, our English word before can mean located in front of, or it can mean coming before something else happens.
Yeah, that we'll do this before we do this, or he sits before the king. So there are those components just to remember. And I think I just reaffirmed the fact that the separable pronouns are far less frequent than the prepositions than these ones like the, ke, le, min. So I couldn't even tell you
how many.
Maybe I've seen lifnei, but I wouldn't remember seeing many of them. Like
I mean,
lifnei is
occurs in the
underneath.
book of Deuteronomy and Exodus. 3 times a year, all your men shall come before the Lord. Yeah, come to the temple. Say Yahweh, whatever.
No,
okay.
Thank you.
And so I didn't bother to say how many times, but you can see straight away there's 18, there's 30, 40,000, 48,000, 52,000. There's about 60,000 that are named, and there's another couple of thousand in the smaller segments. So it's going to be around 65, 70,000 examples of prepositions, but 6 of them make up the vast majority.
And for min,
yes,
it has the hyphen.
It can have the makef or makef.
Yes.
That's how you say it. Doesn't have to.
Doesn't always, but
it often does.
Okay.
That little horizontal line. It's not a hyphen. It's not an underscore. It tends to, if you can find it on the keyboard, and I did the other day when doing that screen, it's down on the right-hand side somewhere on the QWERTY Hebrew QWERTY. It goes right up at the top of the letters, joins them at the top. Now, sorry.
Prepositions in Hebrew 70,000 might seem like a lot, but you just need to listen to how many times millennials say like in a sentence.
Or say actually.
To recognize that it's not that much.
Yeah.
An extensive vocab.
It's the reason that the letter E wears out on your keyboard first, because we use that letter so often in English. All right, so Mounce's way of defining a preposition is anything a rabbit can do with its home is a preposition. Now, this would apply in Hebrew as well, but Mounce is a Greek person. The rabbit can go in it, it can go around it, it can dig under it, and so on. So preposition is these kinds of activities, okay? So anything a rabbit can do with its home. So a prepositional phrase, as we've already seen in English, is the preposition plus the object of the preposition. And sometimes the object will have a modifier, like an adjective. Like it might be the bird sat in the tree, in plus tree, in the green tree, in the large green tree. So you can have modifiers, but it's same basic structure. Prepositions govern the case of their object, of the word that follows. And that shortens down the phrases, the number of words we've got to be using. Prepositions, this is a good part, prepositions are not inflected. Okay, it's not like an article, it's not like a noun, it's not like an adjective. Prepositions are basically unchanging little words, but where they join onto the next word or bump into the next word, there can be, just as it is in English, if the next word is starting with a vowel and the preposition is ending in a vowel, those two vowels are going to run into each other and one of them is going to have to give. Okay? So a prepositional phrase is always the dependent clause. It's not the main subject and it's not going to have the verb. The verb is going to be in the main clause, like gave, saw, ate, walked, whatever. So in the case of the Greek prepositions, same kind of thing. I use my accordance to say in the Greek New Testament, I want to report on all the prepositions. And then I just went to the pie chart. Okay. So there aren't as many. I mean, there are actually probably more prepositions, but they don't occur as often as they do in Hebrew, which is interesting. So the top scorer is N, E-N.
Okay.
Enarche, and it means in. Okay. Except it can also mean with, but never mind. N. And that is the most common. The next one is ice, which means two. Okay. Now, I'll in a moment, I'll show you a chart that maps the spatial aspects of prepositions. So you've got N, ice, and then the numbers are dropping very quickly. Ek and epi. Think of our word epidermis and so on. So the skin on the top, epi. Okay. Pros, towards. Dia, like diaphragm and dialogue and diagram. I think it's a diagram. I said diaphragm, diagram. We have lots of English words that use this preposition. And after that, they're just small numbers. Okay, these are the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Greek prepositions you're going to run into all the time. There's more than that, but these are the ones that pop up on the pie chart. So it ends up looking something like this. And this is a simplification, but this little diagram has been going the rounds for decades in Greek, New Testament Greek. Drew it, but everybody's been knocking it off and using it. I guess it was in none elements of New Testament Greek. Then it was in Wenham. Now it's in Duff, but it's also in Mounts. I mean, everybody uses this diagram. So if you imagine that circle is kind of that we're talking about, N preposition is saying whatever it is, it's inside this circle. That's where it is. It's in here. Okay. If it's ice, bottom left, it's going towards and into. It's going to go inside. It's not just going to come up against the outside. Ice means into in English. Okay. Ek, on the other hand, means it was inside, but now it's escaped. It's come out of. And actually that's where we get words like exit and exodus is this little ek. Okay, which turns into ex because of the hodos and stuff coming after. So ice, into, ek, out of. Pros means towards but not inside. Okay, Jesus walks to the lake, but he doesn't jump in the lake. Okay, and apo means away from, but you weren't inside, you were just kind of there, and now you've moved away. So it's away rather than out of.
So would you use that like walking away from the crowd or like that type of thing, yeah?
Whereas if he went out of the house, it'd be ek.
Yeah.
Okay. And then dia means through. all the way through, because it could also mean because of and so on. But base meaning is through. Okay, hupo is under. Those of us who are having adventures with diabetes are familiar with the word hypo. Hypo moment is when your blood sugar drops really, really low. You go hypo.
Hypodermic.
Yeah, that could be hypodermic as well. But we get both. Yeah, but hypo is
A hypodermic.
we have hypodermic needles.
Hypo. Under the skin.
Oh, there you go. I've always written it as HYPER, hypodermic.
Putting it above the skin. No,
There you go. Okay. I guess I haven't actually had to write hypodermic very often in my life. I've just said it. There you go. And para, the base meaning of para is beside, alongside of, next to.
Neat diagram.
Okay. Paramedical. They're not really doctors, but they're alongside the doctors and so on.
Is there an over?
I'm sure there is, but
No, but it's just interesting that there's,
it'd be above.
yeah, above.
I
or
can't
what-
remember
do you know
what
what I
it
mean? It's interesting that that's not there. You
That's the
think
other
that's-
word, yeah.
right.
Hyper and hyper.
Yeah.
Above, yeah.
Hyper.
above is hypo.
Hyper. Yeah, I knew that. We are just joking about it a second ago. There you go. Okay, so it ain't that simple, but that diagram kind of gives you a map, a conceptual map, and that's not how it works out in the forest. When you escape into the forest, it's not quite that simple. So some prepositions only ever occur with a particular case. And unlike English, it won't be always accusative. So N is always with the dative. In fact, when you learn N, you go N with the dative. That's what you learn. N with the dative. Because that's the only thing. When N goes out for dinner, it's always with a dative. Okay, when it goes on a date. Okay. All right. Ice and pros, they both go with the accusative. That makes sense. Except when they should.
Except when. No, I'm sorry, and this one's become a bit important to me, pros, because it's actually contained in a footnote in Duff. You have to really search for it to find it.
So it's really important. Yes, that's what you're saying.
Well, it is when you come across it or someone says, oh, pros plus this means what? But pros can be used with the genitive and it can be used with the dative. It's very rare. All right. So it's just an FYI. All right. So
Yes.
it's just an FYI, but it can happen. And if I'd known that, I wouldn't have felt such a fool when someone said, oh, pros plus genitive, pros just.
Yeah. So hardly ever happens. Almost always it's with the accusative.
Yeah.
But you will. It's very, very case. But again, the pointer here is the accordance is going to say in the instant details, preposition, and then it'll say with accusative, with whatever. In the case of N, it'll always say with dative. But then there are different, is it dative of instrument? Is it dative of, there are various ways of translating it, dative of location, etc. With ice and pros, your instant details are going to tell you which one it is. And so if you can ever tell me where this rare occurrence is, we can look it up in accordance. John narrows it down. John
19, I think it is.
Okay.
I'll look it up.
That'd be good. Okay. We'll see what accordance has to say for that. Ek and apo, you won't find them with accusative, and I can't even spell accusative, as you can see. It goes with the genitive, out from, out of, if you might say, and away from. That goes with the genitive. Para can be with accusative or genitive or dative, and it's slightly different nuances of location alongside. So para with accusative is arriving, moving towards being alongside. Okay. Para with genitive means, well, I was, I'm no longer there, but I've come away from being alongside. And if it's just dative, it's location beside. So there are little nuances, and this is where your understanding New Testament Greek and so on, Hoffman's little book could be quite useful in conjunction with the instant details. Epi, again, can occur with all three cases. Okay, basic meaning is on, but there are various nuances. So with genitive, it means in the time of. Okay, whereas with accusative, it means in that place rather than in the time of, and so on. Dia and kata and meta are used with accusative and genitive, and they have slightly different nuances. Now, you are not expected to remember any of this, but when you run into it with accordance, whether it's in the Hebrew prepositions or the Greek prepositions, it's good to remember, oh, that's right. The prepositions dance differently depending on, they have a different nuance depending on the case of their direct object. Okay. Any questions from those playing at home?
John 2011 has pros plus dative.
On 2011. Okay.
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, Nat, you're fine? Well, that was Nat. Okay.
Yeah, that was me.
Oh, that's helpful. Thank you, me. Yes. Good on you. Okay. Now, with that in the background, let's have a look at our little Bible passage for this week, which is Mark 1, verses 14 to 15. And I'd encourage you to open it up in your, if you have your accordance with you, I encourage you to have a look at it. Otherwise, I'll go to my accordance in a moment. But let me just bring it up to start with. I'll just, to avoid going backwards and forwards. So first off, I've just put up the basic Greek from Mark chapter 1, verses 14 to 15. This is immediately after the baptism of Jesus by John. He's been out in the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights, and with the wild animals, and the angels have looked after him. That's what you get in the previous sentence or so. Okay. And now we've got this little really important introductory summary from Mark, who's now going to introduce, so what's Jesus doing now? Okay. He's met John, he's been baptized by John, he's gone off into the desert to do the traditional 40 days and 40 nights that the hero has to do. And now the action is starting, and that's what we have. So we have meta. Meta is one of our prepositions. Okay. We've got de, and we saw last week de is that tiny little conjunction, which by default we're going to translate it as but it's a kind of a weak need kind of conjunction. Okay. So, and then we've got to, paradothenai, and we haven't done the verbs yet, but that's going to be an infinitive with an article in front of it. Let's see if I can get my circle up. No, I can't. No, I'm not going to get my circle working. Okay, I won't do it anymore. So it's after the arrest. Which arrest? The John arrest. Okay, Tony Ioanane. So there's your word John in the accusative case, typically with a nun at the end, but the article makes it clear this is a masculine accusative singular noun, ton Ioanane. Okay, so meta plus infinitive with the article, and we've got after, and the debt has become now. Now, after the arresting of John, okay, or in better English, after John was arrested. Ailthan, so if you're playing along looking at your accordance, Ailthan is the past tense of erchomai. Again, we haven't got into verbs yet. Okay, so but it's came, he came, ho Jesus came, eis, tain, Galilean. Eis, preposition meaning into. So it's not that Jesus went towards Galilee, which would have been pros. Jesus goes into Galilee. So he leaves Judea. He doesn't stay in Samaria. He goes into Galilee. Eis plus accusative. Tain, Galilean. We get another verb, a participle in this case, keruson, which is proclaiming. So it's an ing word. Let's see if I can get another line. He's proclaiming ta euangelion to theou. Ta euangelion is neuter, accusative, singular, rather than nominative. It could be either, being a neuter, but because it's the direct object of the verb, we're going to say it's accusative. He's proclaiming, he's announcing the good news. Which good news? God's good news. To theou, genitive singular. The good news of God. Now, before we get too goosebumpy and religious, that's an entirely political statement from the Roman Empire in the 1st century. Okay, the good news of the emperor. It just means a government proclamation, because and indeed there's a particular inscription from Turkey round about this time, maybe 29 BCE or thereabouts, but within a couple of decades of this time, which is celebrating the good news of the birth of our God and Saviour. And they're talking about the birthday of Augustus. Okay, so the language that's being used of Jesus in the New Testament is the language that was being used of the emperor. In the eastern parts of the empire, where emperor worship was more culturally accepted, the actual Latins didn't like this at all, but they took the view that the Greeks were a bit primitive and they still like to worship their rulers. So they went along with it because it keeps them quiet if they think the emperor's a god. Okay, but it wasn't really how Latin people would think of their emperors. So proclaiming the good news of God. Kai legon, again a participle, and saying. So I'll have a look at this in a moment. You might be doing it in accordance already. And then remember I said last week, or I think it was last week, hoti is often used as a preposition, as a particle which introduces direct speech. Like for us, it's like inverted commas, or that. You know, he said that. So he's saying hoti, and then we'll another verb, and we'll unpack it later on. Pet play rotai. Okay, we put an ed on the end of a verb when we want to make it a particular kind of past tense. One of the things the Greeks did was that they duplicated the first letter, added it again with an e. So it's like our ed on the end of a verb. They put in this case, a pe on the beginning of this verb that began with the letter pi. So, and then we've got kairos. And kairos, we know. Kairos is a noun meaning. Sorry?
Lord?
No, that's kyrios. That's a very natural kind of, that sounds very similar. Kairos is time, but it's not tick-tock time. That's chronos, 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 from which we get chronology, okay? Kairos means a special time, an opportune time. The time is right, special time, okay? So the time is fulfilled. He's saying, announcing the good news of God and saying the time, kairos, has been fulfilled. Peplerotai has been fulfilled, kairos. And kairos is the subject of the verb because it is, what does hot tell us? And os at the end of kairos, nominative singular, subject of the verb plerotai or peplerotai. All right, the time is fulfilled. And then actually one of the most difficult words in the New Testament probably to translate, Anglican, it's difficult to say as well. It's the nearest you'll get to Anglican in the Greek New Testament. Okay, Anglican. So, and what's going on there again is a verb. It's the verb for come near. But when we have gamma gamma next to each other, it becomes NG. So Anglican, which is why I'm joking about it being Anglican. So Kai Anglican, and then a phrase we should probably know by now, He Basileia tu Theou, the kingdom of God.
Favorite words.
Okay, so He Basileia tu Theou is the subject, because it's nominative, feminine, singular. It's the subject of the coming of the verb. So he's saying, and the kingdom of God has arrived, is here, has drawn near. I mean, there are various arguments about how you translate that. And then there's another verb, metanoite, repent. Turn your life around. Change your mind, what it means. But repent is the garden variety term. Repent, another verb. And you can sort of see some of the verbs that are pretty predictable now. Kai pistuete. Now we had pistuo is believe or trust.
Mhm.
And this is you plural. You believe.
Yes. Eta. Yeah.
Okay, it's the ETE on the end, which is you. We'll get to know this in a couple of weeks. So repent, metanoite, repent, kai pistuete, and believe. And then we've got N plus dative. Okay, so this is the indirect object of the believing. What are you going to believe? You're going to believe en to euangelio. And notice there's a gamma gamma there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the NG in evangelism and euangelion. And believe in the good news. Okay. Now let's have a look at that in a, oh, sorry. Do I want to keep, no, I don't want to keep my, wherever they were.
Very cool.
Let's go back into accordance now. So we can just, I can see what it's doing in accordance.
Ooh, sunburn.
Okay, here we go.
It did a bit red.
All right. So I'm going to got the wrong thing. I'm going to go mark 1, 14 to 15. And I'm going to, it's already gone. I slid this back, but it's already gone back, so I don't need to worry about it. Okay. That puts on the extra. This takes off the extra. So these are the words we were just looking at. Get rid of the Hebrew for now. And I'm actually, at the moment, I don't have the highlighting on. So I'm going to come up here to the highlight function. And I'm going to select Understanding New Testament Greek. And we've already seen this as we went through, but you can see some of the ways in which it's been marked up. So these in red are imperative verbs, and he chooses red because it's bossy. People wearing red, okay. These are participles, so it's a verb, but it's not as bossy as a red. This is kind of how his thinking is going. And these orange are also verbs, but they're indicative mood. So participle is a mood, imperative is a mood, and indicative is a mood. We'll come to this in a couple of weeks' time. So it's like changing gear. I like to think of it as changing gears. And there's a similar kind of profile for the verbs in Hebrew. I like to think of indicative as meaning just describing what's there. It's the plain, sort of, black and gold version of the verb, indicating what's there, the indicative. Imperative means I'm telling you, I'm ordering you, I'm giving a command, I'm acting like an emperor, imperata. So imperative is the verb when it's bossy. Do this, eat your veggies, okay? Repent, believe, okay? Telling you what to do. Participles in English, they're the ing words. They're verbs that kind of cross-dress and act like nouns.
Mm-hmm.
They are verbs, but they're verbs kind of acting as if they're nouns in a way. So, and up here, there's another verb form. It's called the infinitive. You notice in the instant details, it's verb, aorist, passive, infinitive, which means to deliver. or to deliver over, or to hand over. And one of the interesting things about paradidomi, so it's paraditheni is the infinitive, passive form of it, in the aorist tense. But in the indicative lexical form, it's paradidomi, or paradidomi, I guess. This word, when Judas Iscariot is the subject of the verb, it is always translated as betray. But every other time paradidomi occurs, it's translated as handing over.
And it's interesting because Greek actually has a verb for betray, which is prodidomi. So
I didn't know that. There you go.
Yeah, that was part of my thesis. Whole chapter on the meaning of paradidomi.
Oh, well, I've just stepped into the lines then. Go for it.
Yeah, no, what you said
No.
was right. But it's interesting because there is, Josephus uses it, and I think Luke uses it, prodidomi, which means to betray. But paradidomi paradidomi is just means to hand over. It'd be quite neutral.
Yep.
Does it literally mean handing over when in the garden? Like
Yes, he's
Yes.
handing over.
But when it comes into English, so it's just not a Greek thing, but when that phrase is used in Greek, English Bibles always say betray.
But it actually means
The same verb occurs in 1 Corinthians 15. For I handed on to you what had been handed on to me. We don't say, I betrayed to you what had been betrayed to me. But when Judas is the subject, English Bible translators always go betray.
okay. So that's not a very good translation.
Well, it might be because you have to put that in the context of a gospel's attitude or apparent attitude to that character.
And the ethos of the English-speaking Christian world, where Judas is the traitor. He's not the hander-overer, he's the traitor. So, yeah, there's in other words, there's other cultural baggage that goes into the translation, not just the meaning of the word in Greek. Anyway, so here we have, as we saw, we've got lots of verbs. We're going to come to verbs in a couple of weeks. We have a number of prepositions, and not very many nouns actually, but some phrases that are going to be increasingly familiar, like kairos, basileia tou theou, euangelion. These are all core New Testament vocabulary, theological vocabulary. And this puzzling little word, Anglican, which is a third person perfect, active, indicative of the verb, meaning to bring near or to come near. And one of the debates is Jesus saying the kingdom of God is already here? Or is Jesus saying it's going to be here soon? And there's a whole theological discussion around how to translate that one word. All right. Any other questions, comments, observations on all of that? Otherwise, we'll go on to have a look.
I can't get that to do the same thing.
I think.
The highlighting.
Do you actually have to buy that extra?
No, the highlighting file is free. You have to go to the what's called the Accordance Exchange.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I spent a couple of hours yesterday trying to answer Heidi's question. Hi there, Heidi. Because she said, I can't work out how to do this. I said, well, I'll show her. I'll make a video. It took me like 2 or 3 hours of stuffing around. I can do it on the Mac with my eyes closed, but and I've actually got it running on my Windows version on my Mac. But showing you how to do it is a bit tricky. But you download the file. So there is now a video that shows you how to do it. You go to Accordance Exchange. You click on Highlights, pick the one you want. You download it. It's a zip file. You unzip it. And then you've got to put it into the Highlights folder, which is inside the Accordance files, which is somewhere on your PC. Probably in Documents /Accordance /Accordance files /Highlights is probably where it is.
Do a search.
You can. It comes up pretty quickly.
But that's That's me speaking in tongues now when I start to describe a file path in Windows environment. Okay, that's just not my world. Okay, so I'm going to turn the highlight thing off, except I've forgotten how. Where I'm in the wrong one. Highlights, and I'm going to turn. There's no way to turn it off except by choosing an empty file that doesn't have any highlight, and then it disappears. Okay. So what I want to focus on next, and we might even do this in the time provided, is I want to introduce you to the timeline in accordance. Now, the timeline, and again, there's already a little video about 15 minutes long talking about the timeline. I'm going to close all this and make it come back when I want it. Okay. So one of the things about the timeline is that it has nothing to do with biblical languages. It only works in English. Okay. So you can't really you don't amplify from a Greek text, but you can from an English text. So let me just bring up, as it were, where you're going to find the timeline. So it's a module. If you've done the right thing, and you've already added it up here into your toolbar, there should be a link up there for timeline, and mine has disappeared. That's interesting. Normally it would be there. So I'm just going to go right click, customize toolbar. If you haven't done this already, you might want to do this.
That thing.
Here it is.
Yes.
That's it.
Can you give me a
That's
little
it.
bit more of a reference as to where it is?
It's on the last line, and it's the second from the left.
Thank you, because pointing at the screen didn't really help me very much. Okay, good.
Well, I don't know why.
Yeah. There it is. Oh, thank you. There it is, yes. So if you've done that already, or you just did it, simple. You just click on timeline, it opens up in a zone of its own. Okay, like the understanding the New Testament, like lexicons, it'll open up in a zone. If you haven't,
like you taught us, one had to set up our workspace.
actually, well, no, not the way I taught him. The way I showed you a couple of weeks ago was not to have all those tabs, but to open those extra resources in another zone.
Oh, okay.
So let me just revisit that now. So we're not going to need the Greek. I'm just going to go back to the English. Now, if I want to open up any of those resources in another zone, I simply have to go to library. And suppose I wanted to open a dictionary, I can go to, say, Erdman's dictionary, which I'm going to close again in a minute. I double click on that and see it's opened up in a zone. It's not in the same zone as the Bible. It's in a separate set over there. And that actually works better because I found I couldn't get the thing to open the other day, and I realized I need to use zones and not put everything in the one zone. So if I'm going to open, sorry, not the understanding Greek, that's the same thing. I can simply scroll down to timeline, okay? Or up the top here in search, I just start to type timeline. And once I've done TIM, I can just double click on timeline, okay? And see what's happened. It's opened up in its own zone. I can also use this little expand button to make it the whole window. So there are a few things you would probably want to set first in your preferences. Okay, I've obviously got my main computer at home set up slightly different, but that's okay. I'll use the shortcut. So under your settings or your preferences, there are two down here to do with timeline. So the first one is your timeline tabs, and you've got a number of options. Okay, do you want everything in the world in the timeline, or do you just want particular things? So by default, I would recommend Israel and neighbors. That's going to give you Israel, Egypt, and Syria. That's enough for most of the stuff we're doing. If you want to look at Greece or Rome, you can do that. By default, I would set it to Israel and neighbors. Next thing, what do you want to see? If you only want to have writings, well, you click on writings. If you want everything, then you click on all items. That's going to give you some nonsense So the next line is really interesting. All but Usher. Everything but Usher. Usher was a Church of England bishop who was the primate of Ireland.
Yeah.
He was a biblical scholar in the 17th century, late 16th, early 17th century. And he thought his clergy were uneducated and needed a lot of professional development and so on. And he was probably right. And he didn't like the Irish for that matter either. So a very perceptive person. But one of the things Usher did was he counted back, added up all the dates in the Bible and worked out the date of creation, which was the week of the 19th to the 26th of October, 4004 BC, which you'll be really good, interested to know. And actually, God made Adam and Eve at 9 a.m. on the Friday.
It's very
Which is very good of God to be so scheduled like that.
Did he realise that humans were existing long before that?
No, they didn't know that. You see, this is before they knew about fossils.
Oh, okay.
And
They
this
were
is
planted.
this is
They were
yeah, they're
planted
planted by
by-
the devil to trick you.
Yes.
So, bearing in mind, the market for Bible software tends to be conservative.
Oh, it's Nathan.
Some of those people love Bishop Usher and his dates. I mean, they're wacko dates. They make no sense at all. You can be very conservative, very evangelical, without going down the nonsense of Usher. So, see how polite I'm being? So, I choose all but Usher.
But I don't have that
But
option.
that's not an option for most of us.
Really?
We've got
No.
all rulers, prophets, individuals, books, early events, all user items, and divided kings.
Oh, wow. I've got a more sophisticated timeline than you. You must have a scaled
So
down.
does yours have Usher?
Yours might just be Usher.
There wasn't dinosaurs.
All right. All right. Well, you may not have, depending what you're paid for, you may not have all the bells and whistles.
We'll just put all in.
And
Yeah.
with your dates, you still have a choice of conservative or critical dates.
Yeah,
Yep.
critical.
Yes.
Yeah, or conservative. You've got the two options there. Okay. So again, I would always choose critical dates because they're the dates of critical scholars. Okay. And then the other one is timeline display. I wouldn't worry about changing the font and the color. You can have no abbreviations. You can have BCAD. You can have BCE, CE. Because I do a lot of my work in an interfaith context, I don't use BCAD. I use BCE. And if you wanted to show the archaeological periods, again, I'm not sure what's in the cheapo version, but I can have them on or off depending what I've clicked.
We can do that.
Yeah,
You can do that.
we do.
And then do you have an option of setting up your default tools for your dictionary?
Lots of things.
Yeah, well, it depends what you've installed. So I've got Anchor Yale Dictionary and I've got the NRSV as my default Bible. Okay. Then you go, okay. And then it's all set up.
We do admins.
All right. So it's still pretty. I'm going to shrink it. So down the bottom, a couple of things. Firstly, you've got a expanded shrink thing. Okay. And obviously I didn't quite do what I thought I was doing. Right down the bottom, there's a little key: rulers, prophets, individuals, writings, events, and religious leaders. I'm not sure why they distinguish between prophets and religious leaders, but I guess they like the prophets, and religious leaders are probably too high church to be nice. Of course, you still have the instant details there if you've turned it on, and as you move around, it's telling you where you are. I seem to have inadvertently put on all items. I'm going back to all but Usher. And also, I don't want all regions. I only want Israel and neighbours. I don't know quite how I managed to.
You didn't press OK.
We've got
Yeah.
as well in neighbours.
Goodness me. Okay. So now I'm just looking at,
Critical and conservative.
okay. So up here I've got, it's fallen back to conservative. No, it just didn't take my changes for some reason. So I've got critical dates. Down the bottom, I've got the archaeological periods: Iron Age 1, Iron Age 2, Babylonian period, Persian period, Greek period, Roman period, Byzantium, Islamic period. And I'm just looking at Egypt, which tends to be colored in yellow. Israel, Palestine, and interestingly, they now use the double name, which is I'm very pleased to see. and then above that is Aram or Syria. And you can tell at a glance, for most of that period of time, Egypt is the 60,000 pound gorilla in the region. Palestine is an Egyptian province for most of ancient history and most of medieval history. And it will be again in 100 years' time. Okay, the three big powers are always Turkey, Egypt, and Babylonia, whether it's Iran, Iraq, whatever. So you've got that power base, you've got Turkey, and you've got Egypt. And one of those three always controls the Middle East. Messed up at the moment because of the American military deployment, which changes the balance of power. But if they're left alone without Rome or the new Rome or the third Rome in Russia, okay, interfering as and when they're able to, the regional geopolitical balance for Palestine is, are we being controlled by the Egyptians? Are we being controlled by the Turks? Okay. Occasionally it's the people, it's the Persians, the Babylonians, whatever. One of those three usually is in charge of the Middle East. And at the moment we're in between empires. Because the last empire was the Ottoman Empire, which lasted from 1517 to 1918. We're currently in a time of transition and the new empire has not yet emerged. The Brits thought it was them, 25 years or so. Then the Yanks thought it was them. Now the Russians think it's them. It's either going to be the Iranians or the Turks or the Egyptians.
Whoever it is will be the beast. It'll come from the sea and
Oh,
Don't throw it at me.
end time.
Become very dark.
End time.
All right. Thank you for that. I remember I can edit the film. All right. So suppose I'm wanting, so I've set it up again like it should have been. Israel and her neighbors, everything except Ashur. I've got the archaeological things on the bottom. I've got a search field up here. This is not being, I'm not being totally random. I've done some practice on this. I'm going to say, I want to see where Ahab was. Okay, I've been doing some reading on Ahab, whatever, and I've got various options. Come down here, Ahab. And I go,
Right.
okay. All right, and see what it's done. It's zoomed in just to the bit of the timeline where Ahab is there.
So which how did you get to that?
I used the search function up
Search.
here.
Oh,
Clicked
yeah.
on the magnifying glass and I went
Oh, okay.
AHAB, enter. Well, then I had to pick Ahab out of all the words that it could have been.
No, look at that.
And it zooms in and it puts the target in red.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, if I click on that, I think it's just a single click. Bingo. Now, this is not as big as I'd like it to be, but hopefully folk can see it. So it's telling us, it's giving us a little summary of Ahab. So, king of Israel, married Jezebel, promoted Baal worship. This was not written by the king's PR officer in Samaria. Married badly and went astray. Okay, so from the point of view of the conservative theologians who are making the Accordance Bible software, that's all you need to know about Ahab. Married wrong, and he changed his religion.
Interesting. You have more information on yours.
Unreal.
Oh, it actually tells us Bible verses where you can.
Yep, the Bible verses are here. 1 Kings 16.
Yeah, that's all I have. I don't have.
It's showing up in the instant details because it's 6 chapters long. It's not very helpful. And then it's got his dates.
Yeah.
Up here, you have this little icon.
Yeah.
And that gives you a report. What else is happening in Egypt, Aram, and Israel, Palestine at that time? Okay.
Right.
And I can just shut that because I don't need that. Yep. So I make this big again. And the other thing is if I click on Ahab, the little underlined thing at the top, see there's a magnifying glass.
Oh, yeah.
Click on that. Now, depending what you set as your lookup tool, for me, it's gone to the article on Ahab in the Yankee Yale Bible Dictionary. And it's several pages long. And it talks about his foreign policy, his domestic policies, various traditions about him, and so on. In other words, there's a lot more to be said about Ahab in married the wrong girl and went to the wrong church. Okay. But that's what you get on the little summary pop-up. Okay. All right. So you could look up various things. Let me try it another way. I'm going to shut that down now, and I'm going to go to 2 Samuel 11. No, I'm not. I'm going to go to 1 Kings 8 because I know what I'm looking for, and that always helps. Remember, as Bjelke Peterson said, you don't set up an inquiry unless you know what it's going to find. Unfortunately, he was in Japan when the Fitzgerald inquiry was called by his deputy premier. Who's Bjelke Peterson? Yes. Okay. So in this case, I'm in the text, but I can amplify from the text into the timeline. So I can go into the timeline and look for something, sure, or I can be in the text and I think, oh, Solomon. Now, of course, we know Solomon, but if I select the word Solomon, I can then look it up or amplify it into the timeline and into other things as well. So
what's that? Is that a right click?
It's going. So I've selected it. I'm now going to do a right click. Oops, sorry.
That's why I'm in dictionary.
A right click, and so you've got various options there. I'm going to go look up in timeline. Okay, and okay, which bit of Solomon? Do you want to look up the Wisdom of Solomon, which is a document from Egypt around about 40 AD? Are you looking up the construction of Solomon's palace, or are you looking up Solomon, a ruler? Okay, I'm looking for Solomon. I go, okay, and it's going to take me straight back into the timeline. And again, it's zoomed in exactly onto Solomon, but it's putting Solomon in the context of David and Saul and Rehoboam and others and so on. Same idea. I can click on Solomon, and depending what version of the timeline I have, I wasn't aware of this before tonight. Okay, so this was proverbially wise and a wealthy third king of Israel. It doesn't mention that he had 600 wives and 300 concubines and the most amazing sleeping roster of any man in history. I'll see you in 3 years, sweetie. Work your way around, okay? It doesn't say any of that because he's a good guy, apparently.
Remember me?
The biblical passage is 1 Kings 3-11. There's the dates they're recommending. Here's the report of what else is going on in the world at that time. And of course, if I click on Solomon, it'll take me to my dictionary. All right, so you can move back and forth between the timeline, biblical text, and your other references like dictionaries and so on. One other example of that, I'm going to just shut that. Suppose, as well as amplifying from the time's got away. Almost the last thing.
Timeline, there we go.
As well as amplifying, as it were, from the word Solomon, I can amplify from the passage. So if I select 8 up there, okay, I'll make it a bit bigger. If I select 8, I've just selected 8, but it knows it's 1 Kings chapter 8. And then if I go look up in timeline, it's going to take me to the bit of the timeline where the events that are described in 1 Kings 8 are on the timeline. Okay, and it's going to be this bit down here that's red, first temple constructed.
There you go.
That's amazing.
And also down here, it's going to have Solomon because he's part of that story as well. So you can amplify from even a chapter or a Bible reference, you can amplify to where does that bit of the Bible show up in the timeline. Now, this is not world-class biblical scholarship, but it's just a handy tool for working your way in and out of the text. Okay, there is a video made for you about all that, so I won't waste any more time. What I do want to do is just very briefly show you the remaining the homework, basically, the vocab. So let's I don't know how the time gets away, but I guess when you're having fun.
Actually, can't believe it's 8:45.
Okay, so that's just some examples. We've already done the hard detail. Coming now to the vocab. Here's the vocab for this week. And I realized as I was marking your quizzes, weekly quiz number 6, and reading people's attempt to do the transliteration, that I've been putting the transliterations in here for you every week since week 3. Now, I haven't actually highlighted it, but it actually has been there every week since week 3. And I've also, if it's, I'm not sure why I didn't do it for lambano, but I guess I've just figured lambano is a verb that everybody knows, so I didn't need to hyphenate it. But you see, I've with gnosko and polis and ophthalmos, hecaton, and so on, I've actually also put the hyphens in to suggest where the syllable breaks might be. Okay, so lakak, to take, yada, to know, ir, for city, ayan, for eye. Ayan is also the word for spring, as in a water spring, because your eyes well out. There's the same word, tripping at the idea of welling up. And then 100, ma'ah, me'ah. There's our 5 Hebrew words, 5 Greek words for this week. The transliteration is there, but write it out yourself and get comfortable with it. Yada in Hebrew is also, of course, famously the word for when a couple have sex. That's when, so Adam knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore a son. That's the word yada. So when I was a theological student, we used to say, what do you mean you know her? And what do you mean in the biblical sense? Yeah. So know always has this this potential other connotation in Hebrew, that to be intimately acquainted with somebody, or just I know the date. I know it's Monday, whatever day it's Thursday, whatever. Okay. As whenever I can, I put down the bottom some English words which are derived. Hardly ever was that Hebrew, but of course gnosko is where we get gnosis and Gnostics and Gnosticism and so on. Polis is politics, the city, the life of the city. Ophthalmos is ophthalmologist, and so on, ophthalmology, so on. So they're the vocab pieces for this week. And when I say this week, it's really for the next 2 weeks, because we have a break coming up. The tutorial is not going to be on Monday. It's going to be in 2 weeks' time at 4 o'clock. The vocab we're just looking at is for 61 through to 70. There is a weekly quiz starting next Tuesday morning, but it'll stay open until Sunday night, so people can be more relaxed during the break period. And there is also some supplementary reading to do with coins and weights. But if you want a little excursion, go into the cathedral.
Doing that.
And so it's bolted onto the choir stand directly behind the dean's stall, just there in the side chapel.
The key is to the left.
The key's under the cushion on the dean's chair.
You'll see me on
Break-proof,
America.
burglar-proof glass, and the cabinet is bolted in to the stonework of the cathedral. Okay, let's have a break for 6 minutes, and we'll try and pick it up again at 8 o'clock.
Thank you very much.
And who's going first? Okay. Well, I'll pause the